Alright, hello year 11. Today we're going to be having a look at the language and translation for Petronius, a spooky story. So, just for your starter then, just to get you into the mood for Petronius, number one, what odd things does the soldier do before he transforms? Number two, make a list of ways that you've noticed Petronius makes his story spooky. And number three, Petronius wrote a novel. How do you feel about this format as opposed to epigrams and letter writing? So just pause the video whilst you get this done, please. Okay, so before we move on to the first task, I'd just like to go through this starter. So, the odd things that the soldier does before he transforms. Well, the first thing that he does before he transforms is take off his clothes. The second thing that he does is place his clothes in what seems to be a neat pile by the side of the road. But the fourth, truly, absolutely weird thing that he does is he wheezes around his clothes. Okay? A list of ways you've noticed that Petronius makes his story spooky. Well, the things that stand out to me are things like, he sets it at night time, he sets it by a graveyard, the fact that it's a werewolf as well also helps. Petronius wrote a novel, and how do you feel about this as opposed to epigrams and letter writing? Well, the format of the novel is quite a nice format that we don't get to see very much of, which, does make it quite enjoyable, purely because it's not something that we encounter all of the time. However, personally, I prefer epigrams just because they're short and, they're quite often funny as well. So, let's move on then. For your first task, what I would like you to do is have a go at filling in the literary devices sheets. So, as you can see, it's one-sided, and all you need to do is fill in for me at the side, say which device is being described on the right hand side, and you'd fill it in on the left hand side. So if we look here, the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. So that one is going to be alliteration. Okay, so I would cross off where it says alliteration up at the top here and write in this box alliteration. So have a go at doing that for me. I estimate that it's probably going to take you at least 10 minutes to be able to do this, and maybe even closer to 15. So, also, if you don't have a printer, you're not able to print this out, what I will be asking you to do is make sure that you write everything out on a sheet of paper, or in a Word document. So, just pause the video whilst you do this literary devices task for me, please. Okay, so for your second task, what I would like you to do is mark the literary devices sheet. So the first one, as we said, was alliteration, the occurrence of the same letter or sound at the beginning of adjacent or closely connected words. So, for example, the brown badger bounced around, for example. Okay, your second one down, the repetition of a word or phrase at the beginning of successive clauses. So we're going to actually see some of this a little bit later, and it is called anaphora. For instance, the English saying, by hook or by crook. Asyndeton is your next one, which is when sentences don't use conjunctions. So when they don't use and, or, nor to separate clauses, and they kind of run clauses into each other. So, for example, if we take anaphora, the example I used for anaphora, I said by hook or by crook. If you took away that or, by hook, by crook, that would be asyndetic. Okay? Chiasmus it's a rhetorical form. It's the positioning of words to form a certain pattern, and chiasmus is a bit of a pain to recognise, but I will point it out when we come across it. Exclamation is a sudden cry or remark expressing surprise, strong emotion, or pain. So they do it in Cambridge Latin course all the time. They say, by Hercules, or Hercule, for example. Hyperbaton is a figure of speech that alters the syntactic order of the words in a sentence or separates normally associated words. So Latin does have a word order, okay? I know how much we say to ignore word order when we're translating, but Latin does have a word order. Adjectives and nouns, for example, are normally side by side. It normally goes noun, adjective, okay, just like in French. However, an example of hyperbaton would be if the noun was at the start of the line, for example, and the adjective was at the end of the line, just as an example. An example of adjussive subjunctive is may something or let something happen. So, may the gods strike me down. That is adjussive subjunctive. Hopefully you all know by now what a metaphor is. A metaphor is something that's regarded as representative or symbolic of something else. Meter is the basic rhythmic structure of a verse or lines in a verse. Pathetic fallacy is something that you will have, hopefully come across by now. Pathetic fallacy is reflecting a character's mood in the atmosphere or in inanimate objects. So most often this is used for the weather, okay? When it's rainy and stormy, that's because your character is sad or angry, for example. Pathos is just the fancy word that we use for sympathy, basically. We do get the word sympathy from it, and if something is full of pathos, it is pitiful or it's sad, okay? So we're going to come across a lot of pathos when we have a look at the Virgil extract, I should imagine. Personification, then, is when you give human characteristics to something that isn't human. Or it can be the representation of an abstract quality in human form. So, for example, the fingers of the trees were grabbing my hair in the wind. Well, you know, trees don't have fingers and they can't physically grab. All you're saying is it's right windy. Positioning, then. Positioning is when something is placed in a particular place in a line in order to create emphasis. So it can be at the beginning, it can be at the end, it can also be around the caesura, which is a gap in the middle of the line. Polyptoton is words that have the same root in a sentence, that are used further down the sentence. So, for example, not as a call to battle, though embattled we are. The polyptoton here is the battle bit, and it's used in two different forms. It's used as to battle and embattled. Polysyndeton is the opposite of what we discussed before, the asyndeton. So, asyndeton is no connectives whatsoever. Polysyndeton is repetition of connectives. So, for example, there might be the use of que, there might be and, then, and, you know, etc. Proempticon is a particular type of poem that expresses wishes for a prosperous journey to a departing friend. It is a common poetic theme, and it's also attempted in prose in late antiquity, but we don't really see that much of it done in prose. There is, I think, one example of a propempticon that we discuss, and that is Horace. Sibilance is it's a specific type of alliteration, and it's where you're repeating S for effect. A simile is where you use, it's a comparison using as or like, basically, and it makes the description more emphatic or more vivid. Tricolon. Now, tricolon is a rhetorical term that sounds really posh, but all it means is that there are normally three parallel clauses, parallel phrases, or parallel words, which come in quick succession and without any interruption. So, for example, weini, weedy, weeki, okay? So, task number 3 then, your main task, is to make some notes in your Superstition and Magic booklet about the translation and the language of Petronius. So we're not going to do the entire thing today because it's a long extract, but we are going to try and get through as much as humanly possible. What I do want you to do is, I have made all of the notes for this so that you should be able to have a go at translating it yourselves. I would like you to try and have a go at translating it yourselves if at all possible. I would like to also say that you are absolutely more than welcome to make as many, pause the video as many times as you need to in order to get down the notes that you would like to get down. So, for example then, let's start. We have cum ad hoc servirem amari coepi melissam uxorem terenti calponis pulcherrimum baccibellum. So, I've even put these words into a kind of order for you to be able to translate them. If you would like to make any notes on the vocabulary or anything like that, do feel free to. So you might want to note that servirem is first person singular imperfect subjunctive, just as an example. It depends how detailed you want to make your notes. If you feel like you are completely able to if you know the language well enough that you don't need to make these kind of notes, then that's fine. However, you will get, it is more likely that you'll get more marks the more detailed your notes are. So, your translation then. My translation is, when I was still a slave, I began to love Melissa, the wife of the innkeeper Terentius, the most beautiful little peach. So, please do ensure that you always get your translation down. Underneath your translation, I would strongly suggest that you write some notes. So in these purple boxes here are going to be some notes for you to make sure that you understand the language a bit better, and to make sure that you understand any sort of underlying themes or anything like that better as well. So for starters then, when it says servirem, Nicaros is now a freedom, but is trying to make the point that he was a slave back when the story took place. And the reason for this is that Romans believed that the that the lower classes were far more suspicious. Let's not forget that this is a taking the mick piece. It's from a novel called The Satyricon. We know what a satire is. We've done about satire. Next up then, Melissa. Melissa is Greek for honey, and it's also the name of a load of attractive figures from history as well as from legend. So Melissa is just kind of she's the pretty lamp, isn't she? She just kind of stands there and just is a pretty figure for us. Baccibellum, the peach is it always has been full of innuendo, and it probably always will be, but it is meant to be affectionate in tone. It's not meant to be kind of, Melissa has a really nice butt. It's meant to be kind of, more. I don't know how you could make Melissa has a nice butt not creepy, but there you go. Okay, next up then. Huius con tu benalis ad villam supremum diem obiit. So, her partner met his last day at the country house. There are no notes to go along with this one. All it's saying is that, Melissa did used to be married, but she is no longer married to the innkeeper anymore. Itaque pescutum per ocream egi aginavi, quae madmodum ad illam pervenirem. So, the one thing that I need you to make sure that you note down from this is this weird pescutum per ocream, which means by shield or by grieve, which is a Latin saying. It means by all possible means, and it's similar to when we would say, for example, by hook or by crook. We mean to obtain something by any possible means, if we say to obtain it by hook or by crook. And that's all by shield or by grieve means. It does sound like a really very, very Roman saying, if you ask me. The translation for that being, and so I acted by shield or by grieve, and I plotted how I might reach her. So, perscutum per ocream egi is an asyndetic proverb, okay? So, asyndeton is where there are no conjunctions. And apparently it does originate with gladiators. Arming themselves with every effort in the arena. And it gives a kind of colloquial tone to the tale. It sounds like he's just telling the story at the dinner table with his mates, which is what he is doing. Okay, so Petronius is living up to he is keeping track of what his characters are doing, and Nicaros is telling this story at Trimalchio's feast, and that is what's happening. So, Aginawi and Agi, the asyndeton and half rhyme, add to the kind of everyday phrasing of this. It makes it sound like he was saying, so by hook or by crook, I plotted how I was going to reach her. You know, in a very colloquial, sort of everyday talking to your mates kind of way. Nam in angustiis amici apparent. For it is in difficulties that friends appear. So there is a little bit of alliteration here in angustiis amici. So the alliteration suggests that it might be another proverb that we're not entirely sure about. It's possible that it could be something like, a friend in need is a friend indeed. Don't be finishing those placebo lyrics, Jude. Just presume Jude would be the one who would be finishing those lyrics. Okay, so next up then, forte dominus capuam exierat ad negotium expediendum. So, ad negotiam expiendum is for the business to be sorted out. Expiendum is a gerundive, which only the ones who are thinking about doing A-level should be looking at gerundives. So this is not something that you would be expected to translate on a, sort of in a day-to-day basis. So, by chance my master had gone to Capua to sort out some business. So Capua was a town in the north of Naples, which was connected to Rome by the Via Appia, and it is associated with trading and with business. So it could possibly be that Petronius is trying to give a kind of more realistic tone to what he's describing here. Next up then, ego occasionem nactus persuadio hospiti nostro ut mecum ad quintum miliarum veniat. So, maybe you can have a go at working that one out. I, having seized the opportunity, persuaded our guest to come with me to the 5th mile. So, every Roman mile, which was about 1.5 kilometres-ish, was marked along the main roads, and it was marked along the main roads by a stone. Okay? So, here Petronius is very much setting the scene. He knows that they're going to have to go out of the city, and that in itself is a bit sort of worrying, bandits everywhere and, potentially getting robbed and all sorts of things. Bit of a nightmare travelling around in olden days. Erat autem miles fortis tamquam orcus. So, moreover, he was a soldier, brave as hell. So, brave as hell is already setting the tone. It's setting the scene. It's definitely going to be a supernatural element here. It's the kind of, Orcus is the personification of punishment in the underworld. Fortis as well can mean strong as well as brave. And fortis can foreshadow the kind of the immense strength of the werewolf. We can almost foresee the werewolf thing happening just with this one short sentence. Apocalamus nos circa Galicinia, luna lucebat tamquam meridii. So, we set off around cockcrow. The moon was shining like it was midday. So, apocalypse is from the Greek apo and Latin culus. Now, culus means bottom in Latin, and I take this directly from the teacher's notes, by the way. So it is meant to be kind of a the American hold ass, basically. Gallikinia, then cockcrow. Cockcrow is about 2 hours after midnight when they're setting off. So they're setting off at around about 2 in the morning. And finally, actually no, not finally, because there's another couple of things here. Luna Luque bats. Because the L is so soft in that alliteration, it kind of emphasises how, the sort of the soft shining of the moon, and it's kind of relaxed tone to the start of the journey. Could be emphasising the fact that it's night time as well. And additionally, tamquam meridia. It's this idea that nature has been reversed, and it seems like the full moon has turned night into day. So previously, the moon wasn't actually linked with werewolves for the Romans, but it was linked to magic and to the supernatural. So it's, this could be one of the first sort of werewolves that has a kind of association with the full moon. Venimus inter monumenta homo meus coepit ad stellas facere. We came across the monuments. My man began to go towards the tombstones. So, inter monumenta. We are amongst the tombstones. So, outside of the city, it's important to remember that the streets are going to be lined with tombs. They didn't want, they didn't want dead people inside the city. It's going to spread a lot of disease. It's going to cause a lot of problems. And of course it's creepy because it's full of headstones. It's full of, it's full of tombs. It's anything to do with the dead is inherently creepy, I feel. And the homo meus here, the bit where he says my man, well, my man is quite a friendly thing to be saying. It seems like, although it's creepy, he's got his best mate, he's got his soldier mate by his side, and it seems like everything's going to go okay. But not for long. Sedeo ego cantabundus et stellas numero. Now, this is a bit of a weird one. I sat singing and counted the tombstones. Basically, the soldier's taking his time, doing whatever he's doing, and Nicaros needs to entertain himself, so he decides to start counting the tombstones. Deinde ut respexi ad comitem, ille euxit se et omnia vestimenta secundum viam posuit. Then, when I looked back at my companion, he stripped himself and placed all his clothes beside the road. The removal of the clothing is seen in ancient werewolf tales as a kind of step to shedding your humanity. And this is kind of like a halfway point in the story as well, because the narrator knows that something unusual is happening, but he doesn't understand what. Okay? If you would want, if you're not too sure about this whole removal of clothing as a shedding of humanity, have a think about if you've ever studied Animal Farm. Right at the end, when the pigs have put on the clothes of humans, they are now seen as being, almost indistinguishable from humans. And it's that whole idea. It's the idea that clothing is a sort of visual representation of humanity. Mihi anima in naso esse stabam tamquam mortuus. My soul was in my nose. I was standing as though dead. So this in the nose thing can be a little bit weird. The Romans thought that when you died, your soul left either through your nose or through your mouth. So by saying my soul was in my nose, it's almost like him being sort of like, I nearly died of shock. And the tamquam mortuus as well is a sudden real change from the previous light-heartedness, and it's a really nice simile as well. I stood as though dead. He's stood there sort of so shocked he's almost like a ghost. So we've had a real switch here. At ille circumminxit vestimenta sua, et subito lupus factus est. But he urinated around his clothes, and suddenly he was turned into a wolf. So, this whole peeing around his clothes thing, let's have a closer look at this. I imagine that some people have been waiting for this particular detail. So, it is a humorous detail, and it's linked to this idea that this Roman belief that werewolves needed to be able to access their human clothes in order to turn back into their human form. So it could be that the soldier is marking his territory with like a protective circle, like a wolf, which could be, magical. It could be, it could be any number of things, but there's this idea that the clothing is one of the main things that needs to be present in order for the wolves to change back. Subito lupus factus est. That is a really dramatic moment in the text. It's completely to the point. It's short, it's sweet, and if you read it out as well, subito lupus factus est, it's very sort of sharp in the way that it sounds as well. Okay, so it makes it a really, really dramatic moment. Nolite meo cari putare, ululare coepit in silvas fugit. So I am just going to point out here that ululare is one of my absolute favourite words in the entirety of the Latin language. So we get the English word ululate from it, and it's to sort of howl, or it always reminds me of the way that Whitney Houston sings as well. It's a kind of it's kind of almost a singing, really. And it's another one of those onomatopoeic words, so it's a bit like susurrans in that way. So he says, "Don't think I'm joking. He began to howl and fled into the woods." So, Petronius is kind of acknowledging that it's weird. Everything that's happened at this point is weird. But it is a reminder as well that the narrator is telling the story at a dinner party. He's saying to everyone who's listening to him, listen, don't think I'm joking. He actually howled and then sprinted off into woods. So, the presence of ululare, that, my favourite Latin word, it is really vividly onomatopoeic, and it sounds, you can always hear the howl in the word ululare. And in silvas as well. There are certain places that are just inherently magical, really, and the woods are a place that is magical. There's also other places that are magical as well in ancient times. So the mountains were inherently magical as well. So the mountains are particularly associated with Euripides' Bacchae as well, which involves a tale of madness and people having their arms ripped off and stuff like that. But in the woods, it's magical and it's dangerous as well, because there's wild animals, there's ambushes, people preparing to rob you all the time. It's a very difficult place to be in the woods. So ego primo nesciebam ubi essem deinde accessi ut vestimenta eos telerem. He says, at first, I didn't know where I was, then I approached in order to pick up his clothes. illa autem lapidea facta sunt. But they were made of stone. So, this builds on the idea again that clothes are required for the werewolf in order to change back. But this turning into stone thing is a detail that seems to be unique to Petronius's account. So I can't seem to find any, and it says in my notes as well that, you know, it is a detail that's unique to Petronius's account, this whole his clothes turning into stone thing. It could be that it's in order to protect the clothes from being moved or from being damaged in any way, to make sure that the werewolf can change back. It's difficult to think of what could possibly be the meaning behind it, but it's, you know, his clothes had turned to stone. So, paene timore mortuus sum. You don't get any points for translating that one. I almost died with fear. Okay, so task number 4 is an important task. I want you to pick out from the text and highlight the words that are going to help you to remember which part of the translation that you're at. So, for example, for me, one of the easiest bits that I remember is stabam tamquam mortuus. I think partly because it rhymes, and partly because I know what stabam tamquam mortuus means, and it means I was standing as though dead. It's a very straightforward bit of language to remember. Your final task is to comment on Show My Homework with at least 2 of your favourite signpost words. So the words that remind you of where in the translation you are. So give me at least 2 of those signpost words or phrases, please.